I never thought I'd be writing something like this. A few years ago, if you'd told me I'd be divorced by Thursdays, sitting in an empty apartment staring at a single mug on the kitchen counter, I'd have laughed it off. I genuinely believed my marriage was forever. My ex-wife and I had been together since college, the kind of couple people said would make it. We built a life around shared dreams, a small house, 2 dogs, weekend hikes, quiet dinners where we'd talk about everything and nothing. But forever turned out to be shorter than I expected. It wasn't one big betrayal or explosive fight that ended us. It was a slow erosion. We stopped talking about what mattered, stopped laughing, stopped seeing each other as teammates. Somewhere between job stress, unspoken resentments, and unmet expectations, love quietly packed its bags and left the house before either of us realized it was gone. The divorce was civilized, at least on paper. No screaming matches, no legal war, just two people signing the end of a shared story with shaky hands. But inside it felt like a death, not just of a relationship, but of a version of myself I didn't know how to live without. The first few months after the divorce were a blur, a strange mix of numbness and panic. Everyone talks about heartbreak like it's this fiery explosion, but for me it felt more like silence. The kind that hums in your ears and fills every corner of the room. I moved into a small apartment across town. The first night there, I remember unpacking a single box, sitting on the floor with a takeout container, and realizing there was no one to tell about my day. No one to ask if I'd fed the dogs. She kept them. No familiar footsteps in the hallway. Just the hum of the fridge and the occasional sound of traffic outside. I tried to fill the space with distractions. Gym, work, Netflix, meaningless scrolling. Friends invited me out, and I went, trying to act normal, but every conversation felt forced. Everyone meant well, but the advice, "You'll find someone better," or "This is your time to rediscover yourself," sounded hollow when all I wanted was to stop feeling like half of me had gone missing. The hardest part wasn't the loneliness itself, though. It was facing the person I'd become while trying to save something that couldn't be saved. I realized I'd spent so long trying to be what I thought a good husband should be, that I'd lost sight of who I actually was. So I started from zero. Therapy, long walks, journaling, cooking meals for one, and actually sitting down to eat them. It was clumsy and awkward at first, like learning to live again after years of holding my breath. But slowly, something changed. The silence that once terrified me started to feel peaceful. I began to enjoy my own company again. It wasn't happiness, not yet, but it was the beginning of it. It happened on an ordinary Thursday, the kind of day that felt like every other since the divorce. I was at a friend's small get-together, reluctantly dragged there after a long week. I almost didn't go, but something in me, maybe boredom, maybe quiet hope, said why not. She was there, standing by the kitchen counter, laughing with someone about the terrible playlist my friend had put on. Her laugh caught me off guard, not because it was loud or dramatic, but because it sounded genuine, warm, alive. I hadn't realized how long it had been since I'd heard laughter like that. We started talking about music first, then somehow ended up sharing stories about failed travel plans, bad coffee, and life detours. She told me she'd recently moved to the city after ending a long relationship of her own. There was no forced small talk. It felt like two people talking honestly, without trying to impress each other. I remember thinking, she's kind. That was my first real thought about her. Not that she was beautiful, though she was, but that her kindness felt steady, unpretentious, the kind that made you exhale a little without realizing you'd been holding your breath. When the evening ended, she smiled and said, "It was really nice talking to you," and I found myself saying, "Yeah, it really was." Like some awkward teenager. Driving home, I felt something unfamiliar, a spark of curiosity, maybe even hope, but it was tangled with fear. I'd promised myself I wasn't ready, that love, for now, was something other people did. Still, that night, I slept lighter than I had in months. We started seeing each other casually at first, coffee on weekends, long walks through the park, texts that slowly grew more frequent. It felt easy until it didn't. Somewhere between the third and fourth date, my old fears started whispering again. The same doubts that haunted me after the divorce. What if I mess this up too? What if I can't be enough for someone again? What if love just isn't for me anymore? She'd tell me something kind, something as simple as, I like spending time with you, and I'd freeze inside. Not because I didn't feel the same, but because I didn't trust that feeling. I'd been so used to love slipping away quietly that part of me started preparing for it to vanish again. There were moments when she'd notice the distance, when I'd shut down mid-conversation or change the subject when things got personal. She didn't push, but she'd give me that look, gentle, patient, but knowing. It scared me how much she saw. One evening, after I'd cancelled plans, last minute, she called me out, not in anger, but with calm honesty. I don't need perfect, she said, I just need real. You don't have to hide from me. Her words stuck with me. I realized I wasn't just protecting myself from being hurt. I was also protecting my pain from being seen. And in doing that, I was keeping both of us on the outside of something that could be beautiful. That night, I sat on my couch, staring at my phone, wanting to text her, but not knowing what to say. All I managed was, I'm trying, I just don't always know how. She replied almost instantly, that's enough for now. And somehow, for the first time since my marriage ended, I believed it might be true. As weeks turned into months, something began to shift between us. It wasn't a grand cinematic kind of love story, more like a quiet unfolding. We started learning each other's rhythms, the small details that don't show up right away, how she needs coffee before conversation in the morning, how I get quiet when I'm overwhelmed, how both of us use humor when we're nervous. There was a comfort in the ordinary things, cooking dinner together, arguing playfully about the right way to load the dishwasher, staying up late, talking about everything from childhood memories to what we both wanted from life. I hadn't realized how much I'd missed that kind of connection, the slow, daily building of trust through simple presence, but it wasn't effortless. There were moments when I'd pull back without meaning to, when her affection felt too close, too good, too risky. Every time she reached for my hand, some part of me wondered how long it would last, and yet she never demanded more than I could give. She gave me space when I needed it, but she didn't let me disappear. She had this way of saying things that stayed with me for days. Once, after I'd apologized for being a little broken, she said, "You're not broken, you're healing. There's a difference." That line, "there's a difference," became a quiet mantra for me. Little by little, I started trusting her with more of my story, the things I regretted, the ways I failed, the loneliness that had followed me like a shadow. She didn't try to fix any of it, she just listened. And sometimes that was all I needed. It wasn't about falling in love instantly this time. It was about building something slowly and realizing that maybe love that takes its time can still be just as real. The relationship is without its storms, and ours was no exception. The first real argument caught me off guard, something small about plans for the weekend that spiraled into something much bigger. It wasn't about the plans at all. It was about fear. She said I was shutting her out again. I said she was expecting too much. Neither of us really meant the words we used. They were shields, not weapons. But when you've been hurt before, even small misunderstandings can feel like echoes of old wounds. I remember the silence that followed after she left that night. It was too familiar, the same hollow quiet I'd known after my divorce, except this time I didn't want it. I realized how quickly I'd fallen back into my old pattern, retreat. When things get hard, protect yourself at all costs. The next morning I called her, not with the perfect apology, but an honest one. "I'm scared," I said. "Not of you, of losing this, of messing it up, of getting hurt again." She was quiet for a moment, then said, "Me too. But we can't keep loving like we're waiting for an ending." That sentence hit me harder than I expected. We can't keep loving like we're waiting for an ending. So we talked, really talked, about our triggers, our boundaries, our fears. It wasn't easy. Sometimes our honesty was messy, raw, uncomfortable, but it was real. And each time we worked through something, I felt a little piece of trust settle into place. It wasn't the absence of conflict that made me feel safe with her. It was knowing we could find our way back to each other afterward. Love, I was learning, wasn't about never falling apart. It was about choosing to rebuild together, over and over again. It happened one evening in early spring. We were sitting on her balcony, wrapped in blankets, sipping cheap wine and watching the city lights blink to life below us. The air was cool, and she had that calm, steady expression I'd come to love, the one that made me feel like I could stop pretending. We weren't talking about anything profound, just small, comfortable things, favorite places to travel, food we missed from childhood, how fast time seemed to move. But somewhere in the middle of that conversation, it hit me. I wasn't afraid anymore. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. I wasn't overanalyzing her words or bracing for loss. I was simply there, present, unguarded, at peace. I looked at her, really looked, and felt this quiet certainty rise up in me. Not the reckless kind of certainty I once mistook for love, the kind that rushes in without thought. This was slower, steadier, earned. I took her hand and said, "I think I'm ready." She tilted her head, curious. "For what?" "To stop living like love is a risk," I said. "To actually build something with you." She didn't say anything right away. She just smiled, leaned her head on my shoulder, and whispered, "Then let's build it." That was the moment I knew I'd crossed the line between surviving and living again. It wasn't that my past had vanished. It was still there, a quiet part of me, but it no longer defined what came next. I wasn't the man who'd been left, or the man who'd failed. I was the man who'd learned, healed, and finally, chosen to love again. If you told me a few years ago that I'd learned to love again, really love, I would have smiled politely and changed the subject. Back then, I thought heartbreak had permanently closed that door for me. I thought love was something that happened once, and if it failed, it was proof I wasn't built for it. But standing where I am now, I see it differently. Love doesn't disappear when it ends. It transforms. It teaches. It strips you down to what's real and forces you to rebuild from the ground up. And if you're willing to face yourself honestly, the fears, the mistakes, the scars, it gives you a chance to do it better the next time. I won't pretend it's easy. Some nights I still feel the old doubts creeping in, the quiet voice that asks, what if it falls apart again? But now I know that even if it does, I'll survive, because I've already proven I can. And maybe that's what love after loss really is. Not blind faith that everything will be perfect, but courage to open your heart, despite knowing it might break again. She and I still have our ups and downs, like any couple. We argue, we misunderstand, we make up, but every time we choose each other again. And that choice, that daily, deliberate choice, feels stronger than any promise I've ever made. So if anyone reading this is sitting in the ruins of something they thought would last forever, please believe me when I say this. Endings don't mean you're broken. They mean you're being reshaped for something new. And when love finds you again, whether it's next year or 10 years from now, don't turn away because you're scared. Let it in. Let yourself try again. Because sometimes the most beautiful stories are the ones that start after you thought yours was over. In my marriage, love had meant constant compromise, sometimes too much of it. I thought love was about giving endlessly, proving worth through sacrifice, smoothing over conflict until nothing rough was left. But I see now that love isn't meant to erase who you are, it's meant to meet you there. With her, I'm learning that love doesn't have to feel like walking on eggshells. It can be honest, even when honesty is uncomfortable. It can hold space for differences without demanding we change them. Sometimes we disagree, and instead of it feeling like a crack forming, it feels like we're expanding the space between us, enough to fit both of our truths. One night, after a small argument about something trivial, I told her I was afraid of losing myself again, of becoming whoever I thought my partner needed me to be. She took my hand and said, "Then don't. I want you, not a version of you that's easier to love." That sentence hit harder than I expected. It was the first time in a long while that someone told me I didn't have to earn love by shrinking. And maybe that's the quiet miracle of second chances. You learn to build love differently, with more honesty, more boundaries, more self-respect. I used to think love after loss was about finding someone new, but now I think it's about finding yourself again, and then letting someone see that version of you without fear. At some point, without either of us naming it, our relationship started to shift from something tentative to something real, solid. She left a toothbrush at my place, then a sweat, then a whole drawer. Pegs were little things that months before would have terrified me. Now they just made sense. We began to talk about the future, not in a dramatic, let's plan our lives kind of way, but in simple moments, like her saying, if we go to Italy next year, or me asking, what kind of dog would you want someday? It was subtle, unforced, a future quietly forming out of shared laughter and late night talks. What surprised me most was how natural it felt. After my divorce, I'd imagined that any new relationship would always carry that weight of what if it fails again. But this time, it didn't feel like a gamble. It felt like a choice I made with both eyes open. I'd learned that the future isn't a promise, it's an agreement to keep showing up, to stay curious about each other, to be kind even when it's hard. There was one evening that stands out. We were sitting in my living room, sorting through old photos. She handed me one from my wedding years ago. For a second, I froze, embarrassed, unsure what she'd think, but she just looked at it, smiled gently, and said, "That was part of your story. I'm glad you had love before. Maybe that's what taught you how to do this differently." It was such a simple thing to say, but it lifted a weight I didn't know I was still carrying. That night, for the first time, I stopped seeing my past as a failure and started seeing it as preparation. It's funny when you start to feel safe again, life has a way of testing that safety. A few months after that evening with the photos, I lost my job. It wasn't anything dramatic. The company downsized. I got caught in the cuts, but it hit me harder than I expected. Suddenly, all the confidence I'd been rebuilding cracked open again. Felt useless, insecure, small. In the past, I would have hidden it, put on a brave face, pretended I was fine, until I wasn't. That's what I used to do in my marriage. Keep the storms to myself until they became hurricanes. But this time, I tried something different. I told her, I remember sitting across from her, saying, "I feel like I failed again," and bracing for that look. Pity, disappointment, maybe quiet judgment. But instead, she just reached across the table, took my hand, and said, "You didn't fail. You're just in a hard moment, and hard moments don't define you." That night, I cried, not from sadness, but from relief. Because for the first time in years, I realized I didn't have to go through everything alone. The following weeks weren't easy. I was frustrated, restless, questioning my worth, but she stayed. She listened when I needed to vent, gave me space when I needed silence, and reminded me, gently, that my value didn't depend on a paycheck or a title. It wasn't her words that healed me the most. It was her presence, steady, patient, unafraid of my broken edges. And that's when I understood something profound. Love isn't proven in the calm seasons, it's proven in the storms, when you let someone see your weakness, and they choose to stay anyway. Trust, I've learned, isn't a decision you make once. It's something you keep choosing, especially when it's hardest. Even after everything we'd been through, I still had moments when my old fears tried to claw their way back. A delayed reply, a quiet evening, a small disagreement, all of it could trigger that voice whispering, "It's happening again. She's pulling away. You're about to lose this." But the difference now was awareness. Instead of letting those thoughts run wild, I started saying them out loud, not in accusation, but in honesty. "Sometimes I get scared you'll stop wanting this," I told her one night, my voice low. "Not because of you, just because I've seen love fade before." She didn't get defensive. She didn't try to fix it. She just said, "Then I'll keep reminding you that I'm here." And she did. Not with grand gestures, but in small, consistent ways, showing up when she said she would, remembering things I mentioned in passing, holding me when I couldn't find the right words for my anxiety. But the real turning point came when I realized trust wasn't only about her, it was about me. Trusting that I was no longer the man who ignored red flags, or silenced himself to keep the peace, or mistook silence for safety. I started trusting my own ability to choose better this time, not because I'd found someone perfect, but because I'd learned to love from a place of truth instead of fear. It wasn't instant. Healing never is. But every time I looked at her, every time she looked back without flinching, I felt another piece of that old armor fall away. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting to be left. I was simply living and letting love, quietly and steadily, stay. Somewhere along the way, without either of us noticing, life became light again. Not in a loud, dramatic way, just quietly brighter. We started doing small, joyful things together. Weekend road trips to nowhere in particular. Dancing in the kitchen while waiting for pasta to boil. Singing terribly in the car to songs from our teens. It felt like we were both remembering what it meant to play again, to enjoy life without waiting for the next heartbreak. One evening, we went to a small outdoor concert. The band wasn't great. The sound system kept cutting out, but we laughed until our faces hurt. As the sun set, she leaned her head against my shoulder and said, "I forgot how good it feels to be happy without a reason." That line stayed with me. I realized that for years, I tied happiness to milestones, marriage, success, stability. But joy, I was learning, doesn't come from achievement. It comes from presence, from letting yourself feel alive, even when life isn't perfect. We were both carrying scars, both still learning how to trust the calm. But instead of waiting for the other shoe to drop, we started celebrating the good days as they came. I began taking photos again, something I'd stopped doing after the divorce. She became my favorite subject, not because she posed, but because she didn't. There was something healing about capturing small, unguarded moments. Her laughing mid-sentence, her hand reaching for mine, sunlight catching in her hair. Those moments reminded me that love isn't just about endurance, it's also about joy, about noticing the beauty that still exists after pain, and realizing it's okay to let yourself smile again. For the first time in years, I wasn't surviving my days, I was living them. Sometimes, when I can't sleep, I think back to the man I was right after the divorce, hollowed out, bitter, convinced that love had used up all its chances with me. I remember the quiet of that apartment, the empty bed, the ache that came from realizing that the life I'd imagined was gone. If I could talk to that version of myself now, I think I'd tell him, "You're not ruined, you're being remade." Because the truth is, losing everything forced me to see who I really was beneath all the roles. Husband, provider, fixer. It stripped away the illusion that love is supposed to complete you. What I've learned since is that love can't fill your emptiness if you don't first make peace with it. And oddly enough, I'm grateful for the pain. Not because I enjoyed it, but because it taught me how to rebuild with intention. It made me softer, more patient, more aware. I don't rush love anymore. I don't chase it or cling to it out of fear. I just let it be, and that's enough. Sometimes I still get flashes of that old loneliness, like muscle memory. But now, instead of running from it, I acknowledge it. I remind myself that it's part of me, proof that I've lived, lost, and kept going. And when I look at her, this woman who met me not as who I was before, but as who I became after, I feel nothing but gratitude. Not just for her, but for the long, winding road that led me back to myself. Healing didn't bring me back to who I used to be. It turned me into someone better, someone finally ready to love with his whole heart, scars and all. I don't believe in happily ever after anymore, not in the fairy tale sense, at least. Life is too unpredictable, too fragile for that. But I do believe in peacefully ever afters, in finding someone who feels like calm after the storm, in choosing to grow together through whatever comes next. It's been years now since that night I first met her, and sometimes I still catch myself in quiet disbelief. Not because I didn't think I'd find love again, but because I didn't think I'd find this kind of love, one built on honesty, patience, and gentle persistence. Our relationship isn't perfect. We still argue, still miscommunicate, still have days when we need space. But the difference is, we always return. Every time. That's the real victory. Not the absence of struggle, but the presence of choice. I've learned that love after loss doesn't erase the pain of the past. It redefines it. It turns what once felt like an ending into proof of survival. and with survival comes strength, the kind that makes you softer, not harder. Sometimes, when we're cooking dinner, or sitting in silence, I look at her and realize how far I've come. The man who once thought love was over for him is now here, alive, hopeful, building something real. So if you're reading this and you're in that dark place I once was, heartbroken, afraid, convinced your best days are behind you, please, don't close your heart for good. Healing takes time, but so does rediscovery. Love isn't a single story you lose, it's a language you relearn. And when you finally speak it again, haltingly, imperfectly, courageously, you'll realize that every ending was just a beginning in disguise. And that, I think, is what love after loss truly means.